If you've watched enough of our videos, you probably know that we love talking about starships. As much as we like talking about the really effective or really absurd ones, the truth is that most starships were somewhere in the middle, cutting corners where they could to stay cost effective. That doesn't mean they were all bad, just that they were usually not all-rounders, but ships designed with only one purpose they did well. One such ship was the ST-70 assault ship, or as most of you probably know it, the Razor Crest. Unlike what we've seen in The Mandalorian, this ship was absolutely, staggeringly average, which is why it's a true mystery how it managed to survive all the things it did in the series. Today, we'll be breaking down this relic's specs and discussing how, sometimes, the best defense isn't shield generators or thick plating, but plot armor.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Razor Crest got its name from the ship model, the ST-70 assault ship, which was also known as the ST-70 Razor Crest. This ship model was released sometime before the rise of the Empire. Although we don't have much information about its manufacturer or the year it was developed, we know it was used by local military forces, which may point to a manufacturing date prior to the Separatist crisis and the explosion of the Clone Wars, at which point many of these local forces were nationalized and rolled into the Grand Army of the Republic and CIS military. When it comes to specs, the Razor Crest was nothing special. At 14 meters in length, it was a fairly small ship, capable of carrying one pilot, 4 passengers, and armed with 2 heavy laser cannons. It came equipped with 2 engines and a hyperdrive, which allowed it to travel independently. 2 selling points for this ship was that it could carry a fair amount of cargo. Din Djarin was able to fit an entire carbonite freezing chamber, a vac tube, and a weapons locker in his, and that it provided the pilot with a high level of security, as ground security protocols could be initiated from within the ship. That said, comparing the Razor Crest to literally any other small assault ship made it look like a Walmart version of a serious gunship. Let's compare it to another small assault ship of that rough time period, the X-4 gunship, which was introduced by Incom Corporation during the Galactic Civil War to help the Rebel Alliance. This small ship had multiple decks that allowed it to carry up to 8 crew members, 6 passengers, 20 tons of cargo, and 1 month's worth of consumables. It was also much more heavily armed than the Razor Crest, with 2 forward-mounted guns, 3 dorsal-mounted laser turrets, and another 3 laser turrets, this time affixed on its vertical surface. It was also thoroughly shielded, with heavy shield generators and thick plating, giving it plenty of survivability despite its low speed. And this is just comparing the Razor Crest to a similarly classed ship, and not something OP like the Acclamator, one of the most powerful ships in the Republic's navy during the Clone Wars. Overall, the Razor Crest was outclassed by most other ships in its category, which makes sense when you remember its original purpose was just to patrol local territories, a job for which it didn't need much. You'd at least expect it to have some shields though, but its original manufacturers decided their patrol officers were disposable, it seems. Its poor specs are one thing, but another contributing factor to the Razor Crest being a heaping pile of junk is its age. Even if we went by the most generous interpretation of its manufacturing date and assumed it was built in 19 BBY, right before the Empire was established, that would still put it at 27 years of age by 9 ABY, when the first season of The Mandalorian takes place. As you would imagine for ships that regularly went into naval battles, small ships didn't typically live a very long time. There are certainly cases of ships that were in use for an astonishingly long period, like the Jedi Order's Crucible, but for a small, fairly cheap ship like the Razor Crest, 27 years was pushing it. And this is where all the jokes in The Mandalorian at Djarin's ship's expense come in. Most who make fun of the Razor Crest call it junk, or joke about how it's a miracle the Empire hasn't impounded it yet, which is a fair point. Just like in our world, old, unstable ships were often impounded so as to ensure there weren't any accidents. If the Razor Crest kept docking at Imperial ports, which we know it did, it's quite the lucky accomplishment that it made it through the entire Imperial period, survived the rebellion, and lived to see a new Republic era. Most would have scrapped it for junk metal a decade ago. But it's not just because of the Bureau of Ships and Services that the Razor Crest survived against all odds. Have you seen The Mandalorian? Because, to be completely honest, that ship survived a lot more than it had any reasonable expectation to. This next section would be marked spoilers for The Mandalorian's first few seasons, but if you haven't watched them already, we doubt you're going to mind. During its airtime on the show, the Razor Crest survived so much that should have normally crushed a ship of its caliber. To give you a brief rundown of some of the encounters the Razor Crest survived in just the first season, it was ravaged by a Ravenak on the icy world of Pagadon, scavenged for parts by Jawas, survived a shootout with the Bounty Hunters Guild on Navarro, won a space duel with Riot Ma, a bounty hunter that had tracked them down in his starfighter, and later managed a crash landing despite the engine fuel leak it sustained during said space duel. Later on, the Razor Crest was used as the vessel for a prison break operation run by Mulk. Jaren and a team of mercenaries flew to intercept a New Republic correctional transport. It's worth noting that, upon seeing the ship, one of the mercenaries was appalled at having to fly on it since it was so old. The merc literally couldn't believe it could still fly. Another merc, meanwhile, took over the steering gear and reported it had, to quote, leaking power lines, intermittent navigation, and the hyperdrive is operating at 63.6% efficiency. Despite the Razor Crest's terrible condition, the prison break was a success. Not long after this mission, however, the ship crashed through a thin shelf of ice and plummeted into an ice cave, where it was stuck for some time, having suffered significant structural damage to the engines and hull. As if that weren't enough, giant ice spiders wreaked even more havoc on the poor old ship. It managed to fly to Trask, where it pretty much landed in the water and had to be fished out by a crane, then got sent for repairs. These were done so poorly, bits and bobs literally fell off the ship as it took to space again. To no one's surprise, the hyperdrive failed along the way. Again, it got repaired, only to be destroyed once and for all on Tython thanks to Moff Gideon's forces, who did Din Djarin a favor by taking out the outdated monstrosity he had been riding in for the last several episodes. At the end of the day, we're not here to sith on the Razor Crest. By design, it was a mediocre ship manufactured to perform a minor duty. What we're here to criticize is the levels of plot armor that had to be prayed into existence to allow a 30-year-old beaten down janky ship that was never even any good to begin with to survive as much as it did. Not only did it survive attacks and gunfights, but even after it literally crash landed into the sea, they were able to fish it out and get its space going again. If that isn't plot armor, we don't know what is. But at the end of the day, Djarin got his shiny new N1 starfighter, and we got to see a relic of the past go up in flames, which is always a satisfying sight, whether that's the latest iteration of the Death Star or a ship that just won't die. And we're here for it. But what do you think? Were you aware that plot armor isn't just limited to living beings, but could also be applied to starships? Were you also tired of seeing the Frankenship live to fly another day? Are there any other examples of ships that should have been space dust long ago? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.